Do you want working?
Yeah. One computer here.
Sorry? Oh, perfect. Thank you. Nope.
As soon as it's confirmed, I'll blast it.
Awesome.
I've got my script. Now I have to
more or less, yeah. I booked the room for 2 hours, but I think maybe leaving What's the URL?
That is a very good question. Joe, do you mind sending the URL to Brian?
Send it me by Twitter DM if you don't mind.
By Twitter. Are you sure about this URL, Brandon?
That's the URL.
Okay, good. So I'll send it as
I'm gonna make a quick camera change, so just let me know if it works, and then.
I'm nervous about sending this before I send it to the cameras, right?
Okay.
If you can see it, it's on.
Yeah, I think so. Pretty sure.
How far away from being ready, guys?
I'm pretty much. I just want to change your exposure really quick. Oh, I don't think yours has the. It's okay. We're good. Let's go. It's on. That's on.
Okay.
We're good.
Thanks. All right. You ready?
Yep, we're live.
Okay, thanks very much for coming, everybody. So this is a real treat for me. I have had the pleasure of knowing and working with Alan Levine for about 15 years now. And as I was telling some of the people on my team at a meeting yesterday, I actually learned HTML when I was living in Mexico in the mid to late 90s. And it was only about 7 or 8 years later that I realized that the best online tutorial that allowed me to learn HTML had actually been designed by Alan. I learned that years later as I got to know his other web stuff. So it's suffice to say, he's been doing the online learning thing from the very earliest days. And the thing that I think you'll see that his work tends to always have in common is it tends to use highly accessible tools. He's a big believer in openness and sharing, creativity, personal autonomy, and really thinking of the internet itself as a learning platform. And he's been an inspiration to me for a long time. Some of you may remember him from a fellowship he did here about 1.5 years ago, and we're still benefiting from the work he did during that fellowship. He built some things for us that we've been able to build upon and really do some exciting things with. So it was great to hear that Alan was going to be in Vancouver for some work he's doing with the Creative Commons, which I believe he's going to talk about himself. So I'm not going to say too much about that. I just think it was great that he was able to come here for a few days. He's been tuning up a few of our tech goodies and working with us a little bit, and he was also kind enough to do this talk. I'm really glad you can make it. I also just wanted to note here, we're doing something, a bit of an experiment here. Some of the guys on the media team have discovered a framework. What's it called?
Switcher Studio.
Switcher Studio, which essentially will allow us to live stream this session with a multi-camera setup where all the camera work is actually being done off of iPhones and all the switcher work is being done off of an iPad. So it's not exactly low tech, but it is a little more DIY, which I think is kind of appropriate for Alan's talk here. So hopefully this experiment will go well. If it does, it might expand what we can do in terms of live streaming. Anyway, over to you, Alan.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I was suggesting maybe they hand the phones out. I always wonder what that would be like if the audience got to be the camera people. It's great to be back in Kamloops on a beautiful sunny day. Actually, there was a beautiful sunny day. This would be a bit of a ramble. Not to say that I didn't think about this and prepare ahead of time, but I come from south of your border, from a country in a time of rather uncertainty, and I don't know about you, but I find it affecting me like all the time. And so it affects the work I do and the teaching I'm doing. And so I'm trying to find, the balance isn't the right word, but that's a whole other discussion about how we deal with these times. And so some of it, which I hope is in the class I'll tell you about that I'm co-teaching right now, is trying to get people's sense about ways they can try to do the sense making in this time of nonsense. So, I was playing with an idea of a title, so I didn't know whether it's content with content. I was thinking the question is, are we content with content? That was sort of the meaning that I had. And I'm probably going to say something that will come out wrong when I introduce this. Do you remember, anybody remember this movie from the 70s? It was called Network. And in fact, that was kind of almost a parable for what's happening now in terms of, it was kind of a breakdown in traditional media where they went from these revered TV news organizations to ones where decisions were made by corporations and for various profit reasons. And the character here, he kind of loses his mind, and he goes on TV and threatens to commit suicide. But the part is, there's a middle of the thing where he's really, his first rant, he urges everybody to throw out their windows and yell, "I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore." I always wanted to do that with an audience, and I never had. I tried it in an online conference. My imitation didn't work out. But it reminded me, and the clip will be there if you're really interested in it. Bear with me a little bit of the problem with knowing, Brian and I having this history is all of a sudden we sound like these old guys we used to laugh about. We talk about the old days all the time. Oh my God, it happens. It catches up with you. The first chance I got to do a talk in Canada was in the 90s, and it happened almost by accident. And I find there's a lot of accidents that happen in life that don't turn out well, but a lot do, and they kind of move to sort of a layer of serendipity. Everything okay?
I just emailed you the new one.
Oh, okay, pardon me. Sorry about that.
No, it's cool. I like it. It lends to the live feeling. I was very new to ed tech a couple years in. I was working at the Maricopa Community Colleges in Phoenix. I should tell you that when they hired me, I had almost no qualifications, and I don't really have too many more qualifications. So everything I've learned is more or less, I'm trained as a geologist. So there's actually pictures of, well, those are petroglyphs, which are not geology, so comment on that. But more or less, I still learn most of my stuff about technology from other people on the internet, and that was an informative experience. But I was doing these presentations at a conference in Kansas City with a teacher colleague of mine, and we were sort of this duo. Donna was the passionate teacher, and I was sort of the helpful technologist. And I remember we were at this conference, and I think it was one of maybe the first or second academic conferences that I went to. I was still kind of oh, this is so exciting sort of phase. And it was we were scheduled late in the day, and Donna would do these spontaneous things which seemed to come out of nowhere. And she looked out on the audience, and she said, "I can tell you people are really tired. It's been long." And she says, "I teach exercise and psychology." So she did this in a room. She says, "I want everybody to get up." And she had them give each other back rubs. And it sounds silly, and that was sort of we didn't just do this silly show, but what happened was we were kind of having a lot of fun in that room. And these people started coming in from the next room, and some of them were from Douglas College. And they said, "We don't know what's going on in here, but we want to be part of this." And sort of sometimes I feel about that way on the internet. There are some things that happen, and it has that feeling of excitement and a little bit uncertainty. And I kind of like to be in those places, and part of that either as a participant or someone trying to make that happen. And so that led to us getting an invite to talk to Douglas and a couple other places. And then again, and this presentation, and this is one of my things I'm fanatical about, all the websites I made in my career there at Maricopa got flushed down the toilet. There's a lot of security problems and things we did in the 90s when things we didn't worry about hackers. But you know, I'm pretty adamant about trying to maintain my stuff, so I preserve some of my own legacy of that. So here's where I don't want to criticize open textbooks, okay? I think it's very valuable. I know it's important here. The system that I'm leaving with at Maricopa, they've had this program for the last couple of years called Maricopa Million. So they've made this movement to low or no-cost textbooks for students to save them money. And I just read that they've already hit the $9 million mark, which is significant and it's important. And textbooks are really important. It's just, I'm not that interested in textbooks. And it's not to say they're not interesting and not important. And in many ways, they're foundational. You have to have foundational knowledge to do anything. You can't just, become a learned person. Some people think you can by going on YouTube and watching videos. So you have to build a foundation, and you have to have resources to do that. That's very important. It feels like in our field right now, sometimes it's like that's all we're talking about are textbooks. And so I'm glad people are doing textbooks. I think it's a gateway to get people interested in teaching and learning online. But my real interest is, what do we do with the stuff when we're not using the textbooks? And so everything in between. So again, I'm not criticizing textbooks, but I'm just not that much into them. So I'm going to do more nostalgia because I just remembered there used to be this TV show, and I didn't remember too much about it. It's called Make-A-Wish from the 1970s, and I was impressed because it was the first time I made a cultural reference that Brian didn't know about. Sorry, man. But I remember watching the show on TV, and it was kind of this pseudo kids educational show. Narrated by this guy Tom Chapin, who was a musician, kind of a folk musician from the 70s, and you may know what's Tom Chapin's song?
Are you thinking of Harry Chapin?
Well, he was Harry's brother.
Oh, okay, so Harry Chapin did Cats in the Cradle.
Yeah, Cats in the Cradle. So they're from the same family, very musical. And all I remember from the show was kind of this, they would take a topic, and it was almost like this free-form association, and it would always be like, caribou, or not to be confused with deer, which happened to be the name of a tractor, and so they would do this kind of very quick montage through things very fast that were seemingly related. And it was when I was thinking about that, I don't know why I was thinking about an old TV show in preparation for coming here. I was like, that's kind of like, I think they're talking about the web, and in many ways, that's what it feels like. And so when I looked up on Wikipedia, the decision, but his description said the Quick Cutting Free Association, he described it as a show for 6-year-old speed freaks, which is probably not a recommended idea, but it's the kind of feel for it. And so I find myself with my own work and things I'm interested in, often having that series of hops and connections. And so in my work and the way I try to share and think, like the more we can develop things and associations which don't make necessarily maybe connections up front, the more potential there is for that down the line. So, having done a number of projects, in my time here and working with Brian over the years, and some of this stuff just seems to come full circle. Some of it just spins off into nonsense land. The other interesting thing is, like, you think everything's on the internet. Like, you can find everything. And I had trouble. I couldn't really find an old episode of that show. I was sure like someone would have put an episode of that on YouTube. All there was a little clip of an animation, which I won't go into. And so this is not completely related, but this is kind of like the kind of thinking that intrigues me. And the way I teach and what I want my students to do is not only produce things and be able to show me that they've learned something, but I kind of always want to know how they're thinking. And so to me, the writing and the reflecting about how learning is happening is really important. So when I teach media courses, I don't want my students necessarily just to produce videos and animations and graphics. I always want to know, like, where'd your ideas come from? And so what is it connected to? What are the sources? Like, what inspired you to come up with that? And it seems like we lose a lot of that backstory because we're so focused on the final product, you know, the article, the presentation, the thesis. And to me, like, most of the interesting stuff happens leading up to that. And sometimes it seems like we don't even think about it. So you've heard of the Myers-Briggs, right? How many people have been like required to take it? Is that a thing that's commonly done here? It's like an organizational fad that happens a lot. You know, when I worked at Maricopa, I think I took it like 3 times, and we did the parachutes and I can't remember all of the things. Yeah, exactly. And so a colleague of mine, her name is Laura Gogia. She's at Virginia Commonwealth. She took this new job where she actually had to get certified in the MBTI. And she was like, I hate this thing. It's a standardized test. I don't believe in it. But she actually went through the whole chain, and her experience changed her thinking about it because she found she wasn't exactly seeing the whole picture of it. And so her writing on this, again, really kind of illustrates what I think is most interesting is when, you know, instead of saying like, you know, trying to write an authoritative, you know, explanation of what MBTI is and the whole history of it, she had this experience with it that kind of changed her thinking, and you know, she's going to influence other people with this. So the simple act of sometimes saying in public that you're wrong or that you're incorrect with the way you're thinking leads to more possibility down the line. So this project that I'm working on right now almost happened. I got involved with working with Creative Commons as an outgrowth of another project that Brian and I were part of. He's probably talked about the UDG Agora in Mexico. And at the Open Education Conference in 2015 in Vancouver, Paul Stacy from Creative Commons approached me and said, we have this project and you know, I'd be interested in having you work on it. And so I've been doing that for the last year, and honestly when I first heard about it I was like, oh, it doesn't really sound too interesting. So what Creative Commons is the organization that promotes sort of the alternative to copyright that enables people to be able to share their stuff without like losing their ownership of it. And so you know, the idea is to enable remixes and reuse of content in a way that still honors the ownership. And don't necessarily need to give you the definition of it. I see heads nodding. And so they were approached by a number of organizations. I hadn't thought about it in government and library, where it's important for people running projects to be able to say they have an understanding of how Creative Commons works. And so there was funding made available to run this project. So the project is to develop a certification in Creative Commons. And so, I mean, what comes to mind when you say certification? Anybody? Test. Yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, one of the first things we did was we looked at other certifications, and, you know, you get the highly technical ones, where you have to do a performance, and actually they're pretty sophisticated. You know, some of the, you know, the Linux administration and all the networking ones, you know, you have to go to a facility, we have to, you know, study for it, and then you actually have to perform and do very specific tasks that do show that you know something very technical. Applying Creative Commons is not exactly technical. It's, in fact, it's very untechnical in some ways. It's sort of the nuances. The other way from some of the organizations that we looked at, there's one from the Open Data Initiative, and there's a couple software ones that we looked at, a couple business. Is what you do is you put together a portfolio of things that demonstrate your work, and you submit this pile of stuff to a group of people, and they have to spend some time reviewing that. And so either the test doesn't actually feel like it necessarily really states or covers what people can know, and then the review of materials feels a little bit onerous. So the idea that we're aiming towards is something where, because the work of Creative Commons is in the open, ideally, the demonstration of your understanding and application of Creative Commons is in the work that you do. So more or less, we're trying to go towards a thing where you will go through sort of a content curriculum. There'll be activities and things, and you'll produce. And what you produce, ideally, will demonstrate, to the world and to some kind of lighter bit of review that you have this understanding of Creative Commons. But to me, it's like someone who is very good, at music, right? How do you tell they're good at playing music? Well, you listen to them, right, and say, oh, that sounds pretty good. So the work in the world, ideally, should be able to provide most of what you need to sort of establish your understanding. So I don't think we're going to be issuing these certificates. This is just there's an interesting, funny one about elves that I almost got distracted on the internet. And so the other reason I was very interested when Paul described the project is that he wanted to do it all in the open. So he wanted us sort of document the whole progress as we've gone. And so, oh yeah, I'll do that. I like doing that stuff. So for the last year, we've been doing some open demonstrations and basically documenting the whole development process. And it's about half done right now, but there is the website for it. And there's going to be sort of what we call a core certification, which are basic things that are part of the common, grounding in what a Creative Commons is. So it's the history of the commons, the licenses themselves, some aspects of law, and every time I look at it, it's like I sort of knew that, but there's a lot of nuance in all that. And then the specifications, each one is going to be kind of remixed. So there's going to be a version for librarians that's going to have some additional bits of information that are very specific to librarians. But also the general core knowledge is going to be kind of spun with a focus for what matters to librarians and educators. And the one that I didn't really think about was government. And so as it turns out, in the U.S., 2 or 3 of the departments, labor and state and education soon, well, who knows what's happening with the Department of Education in the U.S., they kind of came up with this decision that any project that they fund, because it comes from public funds, should be published under open licenses. And labor specifically is only doing Creative Commons licenses. And so the reason for wanting to give certifications is now you have all these people who are program managers and project managers who have to understand some of these things when they're working with the people that they fund, so that then when they do release their work, that they come out with the Creative Commons certificate. So typically, if you were doing this as a design process, you would come up with your specifications, right? And then you would do your needs analysis, and you would develop the content, and you would pick a publishing platform, and then you would start issuing badges. That's the typical certification these days. And I'm kind of pushing this through as an idea, but people are accepting it. I kind of didn't want to do a platform. In fact, I wanted it to be kind of a simple form of content. And I'm debating right now, avoiding trying to go down too much of a technical rabbit hole, because this is the part that excites me. So I'm going to speak very generally in that the way we're developing this publishing is in the most very simple form of HTML, or it's called Markdown. So I've already said too much technical. And even worse is that I wanted to originate in this place called GitHub. Who loves GitHub? So yeah, you guys are hardcore. GitHub is great, and it confuses the hell out of most people. Even most of my colleagues are confused by it. So, but what it is doing for our project is allowing us to have this single source version. And what I've been able to do is make it so the exact same content that looks kind of plain and ordinary in GitHub works directly in WordPress. So WordPress can actually read and display Markdown. And so what we're going to develop is not stuff in GitHub that people have to, if they want to customize it. It's going to be like a export from WordPress. So if Erwin decides he wants to have his certification, I'm just picking it. More or less, instead of like figuring out how to fork and do all that stuff in GitHub, I still screw up forking like on a regular basis. What we would provide through Creative Commons is actually just an export of some WordPress content, and so people understand the WordPress editor, and so when they go into the visual editor, it's just like, hey, it's like using Word. So we want people to be able to change the content if they decide they want to do a local authoring. So I'm kind of going through all this extra kind of mumbo jumbo to try to figure out a way that this content can be the most flexible possibility. And so there's other platforms. There's like static HTML, and so I have a version, sort of a prototype, where that same content sits in another system, as well as this one called GitBooks, which is kind of like for publishing, with the idea that this stuff could be published as like mobile platforms or PDFs, so it could work ostensibly in places maybe that don't have good internet access. And so we're trying to sort of make this not only the content of the certification, but something that will be able to sort of flow in the real world. So I will see if this comes up. So this is the version in WordPress, and so if I go in and for those in WordPress, it's actually just a series of WordPress pages, so there's a hierarchy structure. And the way I have it working is that with some of the different organizations, they can actually change the structure of things by messing around with the page structure within WordPress. So they can change the orders of things. Some of them won't necessarily need one of these units, so they can take them out. And so anytime there's an index or listing of sections in WordPress, it's generated dynamically. And so that is going to be very flexible. And so if I actually drill down, we've been asking some people, so, and the other challenge in writing this is, first of all, there's like 1 billion different sort of tutorials and resource guides, and everybody's written something about Creative Commons. And so we wanted to find a balance of like not making it like an uber comprehensive wiki dictionary encyclopedia to something basic that will actually rely on a lot of external content. And not necessarily try to be the most comprehensive one, but enough to cover the basics. And we have XKCD cartoons just because we like them. So this looks like normal WordPress content. And on our production side, I'm not going to show you, but actually this is the direct stuff that comes from GitHub. And then when we export it, it's just going to be vanilla HTML, and that's what most people will see. In fact, most people don't look at the code view. Anybody enter in the HTML editor? Is it only? I never look at the visual editor. I don't know what's wrong with me, but it'll work in both. But the way you can't really see it too well on the screen, but more or less, there's a couple extra bits that I'm adding to this, and so it has the ability, like we're doing our editing on GitHub, and so if we want to update this content, you can actually just yank all of it down from GitHub. And so I'm telling my people, don't edit it in WordPress, because that's not the core content. And so this will allow it to always be able to get the most current version. Anybody else who's going to use this on their own won't necessarily have to do this, but I do want to make it in the possibility if some other organization does happen to take this content and decides that they want to update to the latest version, they can do it directly. And so for me, I'm more interested, like, this is working for this one particular project, but all of a sudden, I've got this idea on how to create a publishing platform that I think is reusable. And so that's kind of,
Alan?
Yes.
I have a question right here.
Okay.
About that.
yes.
So the
Thank you for
user-
interrupting, Gail. That's what I
Sorry.
like about you.
The user is getting your course in WordPress.
Yeah,
But if they want to use it and it's openly licensed and make any change, you're saying not in WordPress, in GitHub.
no, I don't want them to do that. I want them to do it in WordPress.
In WordPress.
Yeah,
Oh.
so like, yeah, and this is where it gets hard to explain. Our development process is edited in GitHub, so, 4 or 5 people in the world who might want to go that route. Then we're gonna have like this, release version in WordPress, and we're gonna export the WordPress content. And so if you wanted to customize it, and you wanted to host it in WordPress, that's where you would start, with the WordPress derivative of it.
That was my
Yeah.
question. I wanted to know if the user was going
No.
to have any access
I don't-
to GitHub, or if you were going to put a note to say, contact so if you want the GitHub version.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
And actually, in that version, a lot of these fields wouldn't be editable, they'd be visible, and you would see where the source was on GitHub. And if you were an admin on the site, and you really wanted to get the download, but for like a librarian who's gonna go in and edit some of the content, we would not necessarily, let them see that part of it. But they could see where it came from. And again, I absolutely do not want ordinary people having to go to GitHub. And so it scares a lot of people. But it offers a lot of things for us in terms of being able to manage this as a publishing platform. And, for content, it's a little bit less, crazy as when you're doing code where you're doing so many revisions. But what I like is the fact that, anytime someone makes a change, there's a logged reason and you can revert back in many ways. So I got interested by some other organizations that were doing, this is sort of a publishing platform. And then there'll be sort of like the possibilities if you want to do a different sort of, this Git books thing that I was talking about, like you would actually be editing that, not necessarily as Markdown, but sort of, in a visual editor. So I'm just really interested in this idea of stuff that's not so rigidly tied to a single platform, that it can move around.
Alan, question?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about, it's kind of a murky area in my own mind, is how Creative Commons license is ported to different, particularly for government users, how they port into different government standards, particularly because, you've got different, I guess the license interacts with different national legislations and stuff like fair use, that sort of stuff. So are there different license interpretations for governments based on how it ports into their own legislation?
See, the thing was that, as I understand it, like, some of the departments specifically said we're gonna use the Creative Commons suite. Some of the other ones are a little bit more general, where they're allowing some of the other licenses. And then, you get into the, US government realm where stuff is supposed to be, by default, in public domain. And then as far as, the other thing is Creative Commons being an international organization, is that the ideal next phase of this project is going to be distributed to the affiliate network of Creative Commons organizations, because obviously the laws vary in different countries. And so there are some units there that kind of introduce people to an understanding that there are different, but you would want to be able to customize that specifically. One of my colleagues is part of the project. He's from Poland, so he brings the international perspective on this, and the fact that it's not called fair use in our curriculum. It's again, here's where I'm learning about it. It's exceptions and limitations to copyright. And so there's a broader realm of what comes under that, because the concept is kind of understood in different countries, but it's so varied. And that's where, again, why coming up with a single sort of curriculum content for this doesn't really work, because there's so many nuances. And so I can't really say about the complexity of the interacting from. I think you're asking a different question as to how these licenses work in a government context.
Yeah, but also how different governments might want to be able to use this, the ability to make these changes.
Yeah.
In order to fit it into their own frameworks.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is, if an organization wants to do a specialty, I think we want to set up so Creative Commons will host it for you and you'll have access to do all your editing. But at the same time, if you really want to move it to your own sort of domain or server, we could do that as well. And there was some of the stuff we did here with the TrueBox, that kind of it's that darn NSA cloner plugin. It's just amazing. It really helps out. So that was my own sort of knowledge swirl from stuff that happened from my experience here that's working at this one. And again, it's that same content. It's not terribly complex content. It's pictures and it's links and it's lists and it's headings. If there's a URL, it becomes a link in GitHub. It becomes an embedded video in WordPress. So we're trying to stay. This is sort of the designer dilemma is also that you really want to format it, right? You really want to get that picture over in the center. It looks bad on the left, and so we really want to put the sort of the formatting onto the display side of things, where you can actually control it.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
It's a bit embarrassing on a few levels, but the output from Git into WordPress is seamless, and you talked about it not being tied into a platform. Are you aware of it working with learning management systems like Moodle, for example?
It's been asked, and when you get into specific platforms, I'm not exactly clear on the Markdown part. But it would appear to me that you could, from WordPress, get an HTML export as a possibility. But, I don't know.
I don't know. Does anyone know if Moodle plays nicely with Markdown?
Just looking at there's lots of
There are plugins, I'm sure.
there's every indication.
Anyway, sorry to take you sidetracked.
It was something that kind of came up in my wondering, because it was a question that came to us like, will this integrate, with various LMSs? And so, we'd be nice to, but, on like an individual piece of content, I could say yes, but in terms of, some of the stuff I'm doing, and, we're not trying to make this a WordPress project, but there's some things that make it really easy, and a lot of people are using WordPress. But I definitely don't want to make this a WordPress platform thing. Troy, Gail?
Quick question. So the OERU folks are making their master copies in WikiEducator,
Yeah.
with the same request snapshot, and it goes over to WordPress.
Yeah.
So is WikiEducator and what's going on there kind of similar to?
It's a similar idea. I talked a bit to Wayne about that, Wayne McIntosh, because what they're doing is very sophisticated, and it's almost a similar concept. It's using one platform that they do very well with their publishing, to transfer it. But you come in the situation, it is a snapshot, and so this is the thing that happens when you give the ability to fork something, and then people start making lots of changes. And then if the original source changes, it starts to get messy when you're trying to resolve those differences. So ideally, but it'll never happen. You'll get the snapshot almost perfect, right? But again, I think they're looking at the same issue, is that a lot of people, it's easier for them to run a WordPress than to run a wiki, and it's a platform that many people can latch onto, and so there's some similarities. I think what they're doing is actually a lot more complex than what I'm doing. That's the content part, and sometimes I feel like with my own team, like they focus a lot on writing the content. But what we're trying to do is create some things that people are going to do as activities to demonstrate this. And I'm remixing my own work with a thing I did with the DS-106 Digital Storytelling Project. It's called an assignment bank there. We call it a quest bank. So the idea is we can author and we can enable, actually anybody can contribute new requests that are related to these certifications. So instead of saying, for the examples of license unit, you have to do this one assignment, we would like to have, 2 or 3 or, 10 for people to choose from. That would be different kinds of things that people can do to demonstrate their proficiency. So this is, one of our first prototypes, but the part of an assignment, and there's a great moment that we had in January. One of the people on our team, it's great to be working with David Wiley on this. He's been a longtime advocate of open content, and he's got this this idea that he's written about many times that to me is really meaningful, and I think about it all the time. He calls it the disposable assignment. And it's the idea of the thing that teachers know and students know that they're doing it to satisfy, some, objective, and that when they're done, they're going to throw it away. And so he's, kind of used it. He's flipped it to sort of we should be turning around and he calls them renewable assessments. But the idea they should be something that has, some purpose in the world, some meaning, etc. And I was like, yeah, David's on this. He's going to be able to crank these out. And so we were at this meeting in Toronto in January, starting to work on some of these activities, and I have a picture of him. He's like holding his head because it's hard, and I mean this as the instructional designers in the room, like coming up with the thing that you want students to do as an activity that's not writing in a box, things that you just told them. And so we're still working through this idea of again. Things that people can do in the world that would ideally be public, that can demonstrate sort of their understanding. In this case, this is a pretty simple one. So the idea is that you often hear these big announcements. So like the European Space Agency just this year sort of put an open license on all their content, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, like, wow, that's great. There's like billions of pictures. But what's more interesting to me are like the things that like one teacher does that may not be splashy news, but so we're kind of asking people to find someone they know or work with, or perhaps themselves, who have done something perhaps not big and splashy, but still is a really good use of Creative Commons. And the same thing happens with good teaching practices. And I know from my time here that there's lots of stuff that your teachers are doing all the time that are really worthy and interesting, and they're like, oh, it's no big deal, or it's just something I do. And no one really like pays attention to it, and it's not about necessarily the fame game or that it's important, all that stuff. But there's just like in any organization, there's always this incredible, layer of interesting things that people are kind of doing below the radar. And so, to me, those are more interesting that are worth sharing. So, basically, when you get one of these, it's got a description, and one of the reason David's pulling his hair out is when I designed this is that you can't just like give an assignment. You actually have to do a real example. So you have to link to an example. So, and you know the work when you design, instruction. It's one thing to write it and sort of conceptualize and know it hits all the objectives. And then to do it yourself, to have that as the first example, it's extra work, but it's so instructive to the design process. So each one eventually gets down to a place where you do it. And again, this is just all new, so there aren't any responses. So more or less, you produce something that exists somewhere in the world at a URL, and you enter that, and it becomes part of the ongoing collection of this quest. And so the next person who comes here will be able to see, oh wow, there's a couple examples, and that gives me a little bit better idea on how to do this. And so that was kind of the design of this original open assignment bank that we worked on like 5 years ago with DS-106, with the idea that people share the work that they do, but also it's like, wow, your assignments are crappy. Okay, if my assignments are crappy, create one, okay? So we will allow people to do that in this system, and she's being very slow this morning. So that's what's going on with the Creative Commons thing. I didn't want to there's a lot to that, and But I wanted to more talk about it kind of in a larger sense of how, I went about thinking about it, how we're trying to do something a little bit different in terms of good old content. And you've been hanging around Brian, right? You always hear splots. That was honestly, it's one of the favorite things that I've ever done, and it happened right here. And it was just an idea about what can we do to make it easy for faculty, for students, often to be able to create things online that don't involve them like seeing all the intricacies of, say, the WordPress dashboard or just a complex system. So if you want to have your class share images, well, they just upload images. And also the idea is that let people decide whether they put their name on it or not. And so those are some of the design parameters that went into that. So we have a site, around here, and it's been a couple years since we did these. And actually, I see like every semester there's new ones coming out of TRU. There's like about 4 or 5 of them from University of Northern British Columbia that Grant Potter's doing. And then like people use them in ways that I never really even anticipated, which is really exciting. And all these are meant sort of as, they come as a WordPress theme that have some functionality built in that you can customize. So I had this great idea. So this thing that I'm using to present is a WordPress site. You might be able to see that. Brian and I sort of patched it together using a theme with a little bit of stuff under the hood that I added in. And we did a couple of our talks over the years, and it's like, wait a minute, that would make a really good splot. So this is what you're looking at. It's going to be the very new first splot. So you can see that there's no, they're not called posts, they're called slides. And it's called Splot Point. I had a worse name for it, but Brian came up with Splot Point. And the idea is each one of these, they're WordPress posts with a featured image. And what we've liked about doing these is that you can have like the picture and maybe the big text, and down at the bottom you add all the resources that you want people to have. So to me, I think it's useful, like if you're going to do a talk, not just to send a slide deck, but maybe to send a live website. And so you can even see when you look over at they're still called slides instead of posts. When you create them, the first iteration that Brian did, I had like a really kind of hokey back end way to control the order, because in WordPress things are generally ordered by the newest first. And so unless you're going to like do your last slide first and work down the line, that's not how you think. So what I have added is the ability to dictate which slide comes first. So if I'm going to add a new slide, I'm going to give it a title, and then I'm going to say over on the right that I want this one to be third in the deck. So more or less to use some integer numbering to control the slide order. But the fun part is, and this is like not even incredibly important, but it's been fun to do. So in the first generation of Splot site, it's somewhere on the administrator interface was something with like 1 billion settings in it. And so what I've been learning to use is this is sort of the way WordPress has evolved the last couple of years, to sort of do some changes on your site. And the nice thing is that as you make changes, you actually see them happen on the right. And I found out that I can sort of build my own things. So if you don't like the button colors, you can just, this is totally like just ridiculous. You can just say, I want yellow buttons. And I want them, I hate round buttons. I want them square. And then, this thing that's on the footer, by default, it's the WordPress site title. And it always comes, you create a new WordPress site and you say, my cool site, and then it comes in with just another WordPress site. So you can actually change whatever appears on the bottom. This actually just happened like in the last 2 days. But by the time I leave tomorrow, this will be on the Splot site. That's my promise to everyone. I don't know if anybody really cares about this, but for me, it's just doing them helps me think more about what I'm doing with quote unquote content. And what I really want is I don't want to build sites for other people. I want them to be able to do this kind of thing. And the other one I've been wanting to do for a long time is our friend Tom Woodward does this amazing thing with. You ever hear of blackout poetry? It's sort of this. It's a thing you do where you take like a newspaper article about something really serious or just boring, and you go in and you color out most of the words and you leave the remaining, and you develop sort of a poem or a little short story kind of made together by the remnants of something else. So I've done this in my media classes. One of my students took, I think she took the inauguration speech by Barack Obama and blacked it out to sort of be sort of a manifesto for laying gay and lesbian rights. And so like, it's an interesting thing. Anyhow, it's like my next thing I want to Spotify. And I'm definitely going off the rails on where I was going with this talk, Brian. So. I don't want to.
So once it's done, we'll just go to Splot and see, and it'll be one of the choices.
Yeah.
Presentation to do, go
Exactly,
there, grab it,
exactly.
stuff.
We'll probably install the theme on TrueBox as well.
Okay.
Probably might be a little bit weak.
We will. Well, let's say this. I will certainly be asking Troy to do it, and I'm happy to hear that saying that.
For my next presentation.
It's almost time, and you let me ramble. I'm gonna, while that loads, I was gonna talk about, I'm also teaching a new course, and the slide said it's not an online course, but actually a lot of it is online. And so it's called Network Narratives. It's sort of a media and a writing course with Kean University, which is in northern New Jersey. And the funny thing is the students are there every week in class, and I come online as a remote teacher. But we're having them do blogging, and the other Splot thing that I've used a lot is a thing called, we have a daily, and it could be a daily anything. And so in DS-106, it was a daily create. It was always the idea that if you're going through some sort of content or process with people, it's really good exercise to do something small, like on a regular basis. That's not a big challenge. That's not heavily graded. And so, I've seen some people do like daily math assignments, and so there's a lot of things that people do. Like I do daily photography, and so it kind of drives me to try a little bit of photography every day. So we've got a daily, we call it a daily alchemy for our course, but the thing I wanted to say about this is that we have sort of the freedom to be like not, well, we're improvising a lot of this. It's not like totally made up. And so what I've found is that we're able to sort of have these interesting things that happen because we just leave some room for the unexpected. So this is from, we sort of had this theme one week of chaos and order. And so we want people to sort of like, decide whether they prefer a little bit more chaos or order in their life. And there's an activity that my friend Nancy White does where you get a room full of people and you do a human graph. And you say, okay, everybody who believes in, elves go in that corner, and everybody, who doesn't in this corner, and people position themselves in a line. So we did this with our students, and I was in the hangout, and so I was the camera person. And so we asked them to sort of, in terms of this class, where do you stand in terms of where you feel in terms of being in control? And they kind of filled the spectrum. I thought they would sort of be lumped on either end. This is a great activity to do, and so you can do it online, but it's a great in-person activity. The thing I wanted to leave you with is that we've been doing this thing, we kind of want to have this course be, we want students to exercise what we call some ideas of civic imagination. there's a lot of things wrong with the world, and so how can you use these creation skills to perhaps think of better ways the world could be and how we get there? And one of them is just the better understanding of people. So these are mostly the mixture between traditional university students and working adults. 3 of our students are actually classroom teachers. And so what we wanted to do is just have them connect with other people, other students in other parts of the world. And the first one we did was with a colleague that Brian and I got to know in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, Lada Aguilar. And we kind of come up with a little pre-activity. We asked people to share pictures about the theme was food, because she teaches tourism, and so we asked people to share pictures of their kitchen. And so what happens when you look at a bunch of pictures of different kitchens? Well, you realize there's differences and similarities. And we asked, take a picture of your favorite local restaurant. And so some of it was just to do some things for people to see some commonalities and differences in each other. And then we had this, we call them these virtual bus tours. So we take our students to meet some students in Mexico. And we kind of didn't have a full agenda, but I wanted to have them talk to students in Mexico because of the political climate and all the terrible things I feel my country is portraying about Mexico. And so our students were asking them, like, how does it feel to sort of see the things coming out of the United States? And they were so profound in their responses. And to me, I was hoping to get to people to some more understanding instead of like generalizing the world based upon the way you see it in the media. What happens when you talk to people in Mexico and you get a different picture? But this great thing happened spontaneously because the room that they were sitting right there, you can see, is very bright. And one of my students on Dea said, "Where's all that light coming from? Can you show us out your window?" And it's like, and so the young woman there in the white, she picked up the iPad that they were using, and it was this great sequence. She's walking down the hallway, and we can see like her like holding us in her arms, and she goes and stands out on this veranda to show us the view from the Puerto Vallarta campus. And like our room erupted. They're like, we're going to show you out our window, and they turned it, to New Jersey snowscape. And it sounds like so ridiculously simple. This is really small, but it was incredibly powerful for students to have this spontaneous experience. And sometimes I think we lose a lot of that capability because we're so busy cramming in the content. And I would like to have both in the world. And so that's sort of the continued next phase that we're doing with this project. We're designing a sort of a game activity for April. It's a little bit like, it's a little bit based on Dungeons and Dragons, where students have to pick certain character traits related to their media and communication skills, and we're going to create challenges which we're going to be kind of designed to sort of be something that they necessarily can't do alone. The outcome that we want them to have is like, we've got to like network and collaborate to sort of deal with these things. So, if I've got strong media skills and Gail has the great communication skills, together we should be able to come to meet this challenge. So we're just designing that right now. We more or less, my colleague and I, Mia, we kind of designed the course a week in advance. There are some things we know we're going to do, but it's both an exciting and terrifying way to teach. And so I thank you for listening. Let me just ramble for a while. I didn't really give you any top 10 sites or 15 great tools to do. Maybe like the Splot.
I think we may have to rush away, but certainly we've got time for questions if people want to keep talking.
Matt.
It might be a little unrelated, but I've had a few faculty ask me this question. They support like the Creative Commons, the reuse, the remix. Their question once, and I didn't know how to answer it, was, what happens if somebody doesn't give you attribution like they're supposed to, or remixes it in a way that you find hostile or something? Is there any recourse? I didn't know, so I thought maybe I'd ask. You knew.
I love this because, I'm working with Creative Commons and I have good questions, and they're important questions. And so, I mean, Creative Commons doesn't give you any necessarily teeth. I mean, yeah, if you want to, you can take them to court, and that's the rigorous route. The other sort of, the first route is just, trying to contact the people. But it is this thing you have to live with, like, if, we all want to have this openness and access to stuff, and you sort of have to say, wait a minute, someone might do something with my images that I necessarily don't like or agree with, and that's something that you should really consider as to how you would deal with that. If they don't attribute you, it's, again, it's by attribution, but it's not a protection. And so the ones where people expect a lot of protection is like, if I put no commercial, because people don't want their stuff commercially applied. It's the people who abide by Creative Commons license aren't going to do that.
Yeah.
And the people who aren't going to abide by Creative Commons, they're going to steal stuff anyway. So non-commercial doesn't really give you any protection. Again, unless you want to go to the arduous, long process of having to take people to court. And from what I understand, court is never fun.
Do you remember that guy who used to be the CEO of Blackboard, and then he started a consultancy, and he was syndicating your blog and my blog and a few other people's blogs, and he'd stripped out all the attribution from his RSS feed, so he was making it look like he had this incredibly prolific blog that he was writing. But
Steve Gilfus.
thank you. Not his name.
I just said,
potentially legally conflicted. Well, that's a statement of fact. The thing that happened there, though, that was interesting. I mean, obviously, just because you're not Creative Commons licensing something is not a protection against somebody stealing your content in that way.
Yeah.
But what did happen was, because we've always made such a practice of being open, and a lot of people know our stuff, particularly Alan, we got alerted. So he didn't get away with it for very long. People saw what he was doing, and because this stuff was all out there and being shared as a practice anyway, he couldn't get away with it because this wasn't obscure content. This was content that people had seen elsewhere, and they were able to pick up on the fact that he was ripping it off. So in a way, the protection there was social.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, most of the time, someone, I don't know that other people are using my pictures, but they'll say, hey, I saw your, thing on a slide, or kind of your community. I mean, I always, Brian used this expression one time of it's kind of like the front porch of your neighborhood, where your neighbors kind of, they won't protect you, but they're looking out for you if you're part of that community. It still doesn't help that person who says, I'm really worried about my stuff, and either lock it down or don't. I mean, the extreme is you just don't put it on the internet, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of what we're trying to do. But the Creative Commons doesn't buy you any protection by putting that license on it. It kind of establishes, and if you do have to sort of go after someone, a lot of times it's as simple as just trying to contact. And if someone said to me they wrote me and said, I really don't, that's my audio file that you used in your mock documentary. It bothers me. I would be the first one to say, I want to take that down. If my use of someone else's stuff bothered them that much, I'm against it. But you can't have both that kind of open sharing. It's kind of like acknowledging the dark side out there.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I just I'm content that there's going to be a lot of stuff, and people are going to rip my stuff off, and they might make money off of it. That's the thing I find with my students is they always start with this. When I was teaching media classes, if I start off trying to make a case for Creative Commons, and I would explain it, and they would all nod yeah, I understand. And then it would always be someone's going to steal my pictures and make a lot of money off of it. And so, and I understand why people say it, but it's really hard to make money off of stuff. And so I kind of stopped kind of front-ending with explaining about Creative Commons, and I would sort of expose them to open license content sources that they would use during the course of their work. And maybe 2 out of 30 students by the end would say, wow, that kind of makes me think about the fact that I made use of other people's stuff. But, now, that was, last time I ran it was like 5 years ago. And, with social media, and there's no license when someone tweets a picture. I mean, you don't trace it, and it's almost this kind of norm now where there's contactless media that floats around, and I every now and then I write about stuff because I find there's people who like people. There's this one guy on Medium who's got like a 90,000 person readership, and he always uses images with no attribution, and they're from places, and sometimes they are licensed on use, but they're not, and so attribution as a requirement doesn't interest me as sort of a way of saying thanks, and it's such a small thing to do, and I just I want to be demonstrating and asking other people to demonstrate the gratitude side, so. We're working on a unit in here. We have sort of a social aspects to Creative Commons, and we actually, there's a kind of a technical how-to section on attribution, which is like the mechanics of it. But we also want to talk about, the idea of it as being part of, a commons, and that's the idea of a commons.
By the way, Alan doesn't just talk about attributing as something that's nice to do. He's actually written a few pieces of very handy code, including browser toolbars. So if you're on Flickr and you see a Creative Commons licensed piece of work, you click the toolbar and it actually will scrape the page and pull out a very easy cut and paste attribution as the creator wants to be attributed. So he's gone out of his way to make it easier for a lot of people, including me, to actually be. Because for me, a lot of times it just comes down to laziness.
It's a real pain to do. Again, like, is there a right way? There's no right way to do attribution. There's recommendations, but like any attribution is better than none. But frankly, it is tedious, and I run the same times. Like, if you're going to do the full thing, you're going to get the link to the source, the name of the person who created, the license, and link to the license. I mean, you're at, oh my God, like 6, copy paste, but it does get tedious. The
You
new
got it down to one copy.
I got down to 1 copy paste, and there's a new beta Creative Commons search engine. It's at search.creativecommons.org, and so they're wired into not only Flickr and a couple other large repositories, but also a couple museum collections. And they do have a one-click attribution built into that, and so there are people working on it.
Comments or questions? So I think Alan's going to be around for most of the day. We've got a little bit of work to do on TrueBox tune-ups, but other than that, I don't think you're originally scheduled today. I think you got a lunch date at around 1 o'clock, so between 1 and 2 he's spoken for or so. But other than that, if you're around today and you just want to sit down with Alan and look over some stuff or just get his opinion on something or just exchange contact info, because one of the great things about Alan is you can fire him a question and he tends to treat us like collaborators, and he's always been very helpful, and there's a lot of people in this room who know that. So I'd like to thank Alan not only for this talk, but again, all the work he's done for us over the last couple of years, and just, I feel like he's part of our team. I certainly feel that way, and yeah, you just keep bringing the goodness. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you.
And Troy's doing a talk at 12 in the same room?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Yes.
So I don't have to go to 12?
Thursday.
Thursday.
Rest of the day.
Today's not Thursday?